Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to our latest virtual student careers event, Digital Transformation and the Law with Herbert Smith Freehills. Now, my name's Tom Conley. I am the editor of Legal Cheek and the chair for today's panel discussion. A discussion which features, I'm delighted to say, 4 members of Herbert Smith Freehills' Digital Law Group, which is a global multidisciplinary team of digitally skilled lawyers that supports the firm's clients on their adoption and use of cutting-edge technologies, including the things that you might have read in the press, like blockchain, digital assets, and of course, artificial intelligence. Today, I'm joined by Alex. He's a senior technology lawyer and head of the Digital Law Group at HSF. Now, not alongside him, but in the separate window is Holly King. She is a real estate lawyer and a member of the Digital Law Group. And then alongside her is Jamie Ball, who's an associate in the Digital Law Group. And then back with Alex, next to Alex is Sabesh, who's a trainee solicitor in his 4th seat, which I believe is corporate, and he's also a member of the Digital Law Group. First of all, a very good afternoon to you all, and thank you very much for joining me. Before we dive into the questions, just a couple of things to flag for those of you that are tuned in at home or in the law library or wherever you might be this afternoon. You can submit questions to the panel as we're going along. There's a couple of ways that you can do that. You can do that in the chat bar on the right-hand side. Some of you have already found that, which is great. Or you can actually submit them through the Q&A tab. Again, that can be found on the right-hand side. Also, just to flag, this Q&A lasts for an hour, runs till 5 p.m. Before then we break off for the networking. We have 2 networking booths for you this afternoon. We have the Meet the Speakers booth, so if we don't get time to ask your question during the Q&A, there's an opportunity for you to pop into the booth there and ask the speakers a question there. And we also have the graduate recruitment team booth, so if you've got any questions about VAC schemes, training contract applications, or just generally life at Herbert Smith Freehills, the grad rec team will be on hand to answer those. We also have a poll this afternoon, but we'll come to that a little bit later on. So we're going to dive straight into the questions now, because we've actually got quite a lot to get through in the next hour. And the first one is a very general question, and it sets the scene for the discussion this afternoon. But could I get the speakers first to introduce yourself and explain a little bit about your career journey to date? And I'll kick off with Alex, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Tom. It's great to be here, and I'm really looking forward to all of the various questions that we've got for the next hour or so. So very quickly, as Tom rightly mentioned a second ago, I'm Alex Crivero. I am a senior technology lawyer at Herbert Smith Freehills, and I also co-head globally the Digital Law Group over here. My background, so it's an interesting one. I have, well, maybe not that interesting. I've always been interested in technology ever since a young age. It's something that my dad did, and so it was something that I knew I had a particular passion for when I was growing up. But I was never really sure how I wanted to use it. And I was always very sure, probably because I argue quite a lot with everybody, that I wanted to be a lawyer. So I decided that university was the right route. And I did a straight law degree at the University of Kent, which is 3 years long. I then went over to the what is now the University of Law, but was College of Law back at the time, probably showing how old I am now, over in Guildford. And obviously did my LPC over there. And then I went into a training contract at Ashurst, another city law firm. Over there, I did seats in securities and derivatives. I did seats in tax. I did seats in employment. It's showing my memory now. And I did a seat in TMT, Technology, Media and Telecommunications. And I was bitten with the TMT bug straight away. I absolutely loved everything I did there. I then left Ashurst as an NQ and went in-house to a software as a service company, so a cloud company for e-commerce, where I spent 1.5 years as their legal counsel for EMEA and the UK, and then went into a boutique technology-focused practice called Kemp Little, which is now part of Deloitte Legal, where I was also seconded out to the global technology consultancy Accenture for 6 months, and to the unicorn Farfetch for another 6 months as well. So fashion e-commerce unicorn Farfetch, which were fantastic, gave me a complete range of different things that I really enjoyed doing. I loved all the technology. And then I came over to Herbert Smith Freehills about 5 years ago as a TMT lawyer, where I focused principally on outsourcing matters, and then took over as the digital law lead for the UK for the digital law group when we set it up in 2019, and then progressed through to now the head of the team as of just a few weeks ago this year. So it's been a dotted journey, but a very exciting journey as well, and lots of stuff that could be said about that, I'm sure, in the networking session. But I'll stop for now and perhaps pass over to maybe Holly, unless, Tom, you thought to go somewhere else.
No, Holly, great.
Hi, I'm Holly. I'm a senior associate in the real estate team at Herbert Smith Freehills, and on the part-time secondment to the digital law group. My journey is I did an undergraduate law degree at Nottingham University. I then did a short spell as a letting agent before going on to carry out my LPC in Guildford. I then did my training contract at a boutique law firm on Sloane Square called Pemberton Greenish, before moving across to Stevenson Harwood in their real estate finance team, and then 2.5 years ago moved across to Herbert Smith into their general real estate team. So a strong real estate focus from my perspective. I think my interest in technology has always been a focus on making day-to-day life better and looking at our clients and how they can make their day-to-day life better and more efficient and improve their outputs.
Thank you very much, Holly. I think I'll stick with your room and go to Jamie, please.
Thanks, Tom. It's great to be here, everyone. I think Legal Cheek wrote quite a lot about my story, so I'll keep it brief. I started out as a coder when I was about 13 and have been a techie ever since. One of my first tech projects, the client refused to pay. So that got me very much interested in law because I had no idea what a contract was at that point. I'm now surrounded by them every day. Moving on through the years, I went to Nottingham and studied law there, same as Holly. And then found myself at HSF, the firm that seemed to be techie and also had a load of people that I really clicked with. So qualified after a training contract there into our digital law group. And here I am today, ready to answer your questions.
Thanks very much for that, Jamie. And I think one of the members of the Legal Cheek team is going to pop a link to that interview that you did with Legal Cheek. So if you're keen to find out a little bit more about Jamie's career to date, be sure to click on that link after the Q&A and networking. But lastly, on the panel, I'd like to hear from Sabesh, please.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Lovely to be here. I'm Sabesh, and I'm a fourth C trainee here at HSF. My interest in tech started out in secondary school when I was dabbling in some web design and open source software development. And that introduced me to the whole concept of open source licenses, and that brought me into contact with IP law. And that has led me on a journey to where I am today. So I read law at King's, and I did also a master's at Oxford in law. And while at HSF, I've sat in M&A, I've sat in IP, I've sat in TMT disputes, and now I'm here in the DLG, which has been really great so far. So excited to speak to all of you during the session and later during the networking.
Thanks for that, Sabesh, and thank you to all the panelists for giving those introductions. So now everybody tuned in knows a little bit about you and what you do, and we'll dive into some of the kind of the topic-specific questions, and we're going to start in the weird and wonderful area that is blockchain. And we have a question here from Sandra McLean from Newcastle University, and she asks, tangible assets can be recorded on blockchains. Who is responsible for regulating ownership? And could there ever be a cohesive enforcement globally? And I think we're going to Alex for that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Blockchain's very close to my heart. We are dealing with a lot of different blockchain clients at the moment, and certainly the issue of ownership and the issue of enforcement both come up in a lot of the conversations that we are having across the board with all different types of clients in this space. So I think there's two angles really to look at in relation to this. One is legal and one is regulatory in a broad sense. From a legal angle, standard English law concepts around ownership apply as typically would be the case with any other asset. What I think is really interesting in that space at the moment, particularly in digital assets generally across the board, is what the Law Commission of England and Wales is currently doing, which is they've gone out and done a few different calls for evidence to say, actually, do we need to be refreshing our laws? Do we need to be updating our laws to accommodate these new types of digital assets in question here? And that is in process at the moment. We've input very heavily into that in both the pre-consultation and consultation phase. The outcome of the consultation is not ready yet. But we're really looking forward to seeing what route they necessarily go down there. From the other side, you've of course got the regulatory angle. And in that sense, in the UK, for example, we have the Financial Conduct Authority, FCA, that are responsible for governing that regulatory aspect. Working closely with the Bank of England, HMT, and various others across the board as well in relation to the financial health of the country and the individuals that are within it. But of course, different countries have their own different financial regulators, MAS out in Singapore, for example, various different ones in different countries, as you'd imagine. And they're looking very closely, as you might expect, at what kind of regulation is going to be needed around companies offering services in the digital asset space. There's already AML/CTF, or Know Your Client, anti-money laundering type regulations that apply to a number of them and require registration. But the question is there a need for more regulation in that space, tighter regulation on the different types of asset and asset classes that are necessarily there? That's still being worked through, but they're working very closely, as I say, with a number of different organizations to do that. And in relation to cohesive enforcement globally, I think if you look to Europe, it's a really good example of this and say, actually, how easy is it to get cohesive enforcement across the board in relation to any particular item? It could be digital assets, it could be anything in particular. And I think the answer is very, very, very difficult, even amongst a bunch of member states who are all agreed to move in the same direction. If you look at some of the regulations and directives as they are implemented, they do take somewhat a different direction and approach in relation to each of them. And that's inherently built into competition. That's inherently built into the fact that actually each country does want to be able to take an individual route and to be able to regulate more or less, or govern ownership more or less, to be able to then position themselves in the global market in whatever way they want to be seen. So I think the likelihood around cohesive enforcement globally be very, very limited, particularly when you look, as I say, at things like China, who have outlawed crypto, compared to MAS out in Singapore, who are very pro-crypto. So you've got very opposite ends of the spectrum. I can talk about it all day, Tom, so I'll stop.
No. It's fascinating. And I just wanted to ask a very quick follow-up question before we move on to another area of blockchain as well. But I just wondered, is there any kind of like examples that you can give of, not necessarily specific to HSF clients, but what you're seeing in this space and what blockchain is being used for?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question, Tom. Thanks. So the things that we typically deal with on a day-to-day basis really fall into two camps when it comes to blockchain. On one hand, it's around blockchain platforms for driving efficiency in dispersed supply chains effectively. So it could be for supply chain provenance, it could be for tracing things back to their source. So if you look at things like IBM Food Trust, where they're saying effectively, well, we need to understand where this strawberry came from, where this pack of strawberries came from, for anyone that remembers the issues out in Australia a while ago with a particular needle that was in the strawberries, and they had to take off from the shelves every packet of strawberry until they worked out where that original pack came from, so that they could then lock down their supply chain. That's driven a lot of thinking in that space around, for example, how do you go about supply chain provenance? And blockchain is a fantastic example. So lots of organizations in supply chain, long, complex supply chains looking at it there. Removing intermediaries from processes, for example, is a very important one when you're thinking about complex things like trade finance. So a lot of our financial organizations, financial services institutions are looking at how do we make our processes more streamlined by enabling this instantaneous peer-to-peer transfer of documentation, for example, or information using blockchain. And then on the other hand, you've got this completely separate world, well, not separate, but certainly a slightly different world of crypto. And particularly, we do a lot of work with the crypto exchanges. 4 of the top 15 global largest crypto exchanges are our clients at the moment. So we do a lot of work with those organizations on understanding all sorts of things around financial services regulation, and what it is that they are and are not allowed to do with different types of token or coin, where they're going to be launching in new markets, what they're permitted to do because of that difference between the enforcement in the global different markets. And also, of course, looking at how can they act as custodians within the prescribed rules of the FCA and others as well. So lots of stuff in that kind of space, Tom.
That's great. Thank you for that excellent overview, Alex. We're now going to move on. Again, stick with blockchain, but we're going to look ahead. And Klimzak Damien from the University of Aberdeen asks, where do you see the blockchain technology in the next 5 to 10 years? So looking ahead, and I think we're coming to Jamie on that one.
Oh, thanks, Tom. That's a great question. I think to answer that question, you do have to make a split, which is on the lines of what Alex just outlined. And that's between the blockchain platforms, so the trade finance platforms, and then crypto. We are now, businesses are now really starting to get behind blockchain platforms and blockchain solutions. So certainly in the next 5 years, my personal view is we will only see an increase in interest and implementation of blockchain platforms. Crypto is the fun one, and please do not confuse anything I'm about to say with financial advice, because lawyers cannot give financial advice generally, including me. There is obviously a lot of hype around crypto at the moment, and we're seeing whole new pools of value that markets are being made in. And I don't think anybody can accurately predict what's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years there. My view is the value won't disappear, but I'm very intrigued to see where the value moves to, because we're now starting to see very different types of blockchain platforms, or rather crypto solutions, where the currencies or operations are becoming far more sophisticated. We're seeing cryptocurrencies which are using far less energy than Bitcoin now, because the traditional players use a lot of energy. So where that value is going to shift, I think is that's the fascinating question for me.
Thanks very much for that, Jamie. We're going to leave blockchain behind momentarily and look at another exciting area that seems to be sweeping the legal profession, and that's the use of artificial intelligence. And with that in mind, we have a question here from Ed Bates at the University of Essex, and he asks, artificial intelligence is increasingly being used to make labor-intensive tasks such as discovery and due diligence more efficient and quicker. How does this impact a firm's business model, which may be based on billable hours? And I think we're going to, is it Sabesh we're going to on that one?
Yeah, happy to answer that. That's a very interesting question. So I think this tension that Ed raises between doing things more efficiently and then the firm's business model resolves itself when you recognize that there's not a finite amount of work out there. So what this means is that if you can do work more quickly and more cheaply, a law firm is able to take on more work and spend more time winning work. And you're able to capture more work that way. Another point that I wanted to flag in this context is that using AI is also driven by client needs. So for instance, if a client comes to you and says they need 1,000 contracts reviewed within a certain period of time, it's nearly impossible for you to manually review it in that period of time without using a tool like AI. And to give you a flavor, at HSF, we use a tool called Kira to support corporate DD. And what Kira does is that allows you to run machine learning models on a large number of documents. And there's several features that we use. At the most basic level, it's able to OCR or scan the documents and make it machine readable and searchable. But more interestingly, if you're trying to flag a particular clause, let's say you're reviewing a series of leases and you want to know whether or not it has a change of control clause, it's able to pick up change of control clauses and extract those clauses into a spreadsheet. So you're able to flag quickly which documents have change of control clauses and which don't. So it really assists and streamlines the due diligence process very much. And I just want to end on the point that as a junior lawyer, it means that a lot of the processy drudge work is out of the way, and it really helps you focus on the more high value work. And it's very welcomed.
That's a really interesting point that you ended there on, Sabesh, because maybe, Alex, if I could turn to you very quickly. We always, as a journalist, we do lots of these events, and quite a common theme among students is they'll hear artificial intelligence and mean, or does that mean that the firm will need less trainees somehow? They've made that connection, when in reality, as Sabesh just said there, it actually frees up trainees to effectively do more interesting legal work and free up the what could essentially be mundane tasks like due diligence to the software.
Absolutely, that's exactly spot on, Tom. The reality is that there's a lot of that bulk heavy work that needs to be done that is mundane, that is, it's not the most exciting kind of thing to do. We have to put our hands up and be honest about that. And as somebody that as a trainee had to do plenty of it, I'm certainly glad to see the back of it, frankly, with the back of some of these things. The reality is that doesn't mean we're going to need fewer trainees. Far from it. Back to Sabesh's point, we're winning more work. We've got more work coming through the doors, not less. What we need are a skilled workforce that are able to add value in a number of different ways. And the easiest thing to do is to take away that low-level type work that can be performed, at least in part, by these programs, and allow these individuals to train up quicker on more complex work or more value additive work, to get involved in a broader range of different things as well. So actually participating more in these pitch processes or the business development that sits around winning new work, because now suddenly we have more time to be able to do those kind of things, for example, and delivering up wholly different types of things to those which they would normally be participating in. So it's, for me personally, a very positive step in the right direction. And I'd say, as to an end point on that, the main thing about it is really that this technology augments the role of lawyers. It doesn't replace the role of lawyers. And I think that's really important. Lawyers have a really specific, and I'm sure I'll touch on this again at some point, but lawyers have a really specific capability, skill set, role. And actually it's an inherently human set of skills. EQ, creativity, problem solving, judgment, all of those things that frankly the AI system and others can't replace. So we still need those two things to be working in unison. Now all we can do is do work better, quicker, cheaper, more efficiently. And that's a welcome thing for everyone.
Thanks for that, Alex. We're now going to move on to a question that's focusing on the real estate sector. So Holly, this is where you come in, and hopefully you'll be able to answer this one. And the question is, can you provide an example of prop tech, as it's called, and what impact do you think technology will have on the real estate sector in the years to come?
Yeah, sure. I think the real estate tech sector is actually calling upon a whole range of technologies to provide real estate as a service rather than the traditional real estate model of a long-term lease whereby occupiers are responsible for their building. So some examples of where they're utilizing that are using AI products. So JLL have launched GoSpace, which uses AI to monitor who is using a building in real time and therefore expand and contract the real estate footprint that a company needs. So, for example, as people are coming through the door, they're being assigned their desks. You're not having to use every floor in a building because two people are in the office. And that really resonates in the post-pandemic world where actually people are adopting more flexible working practices. Then moving on to the Internet of Things and sensors and monitoring energy efficiency and air quality within buildings. So rather than heating being on throughout a building, it's have a sensor, you know where people are, you know where people are moving to, you know what the temperature is outside. It's a lot more accurate. There's also a focus on ventilation. And again, I think COVID has accelerated this, but it applied previously, and improving air quality. And I think we'll move towards a state whereby users of offices are able to see the data on their air quality, on the heating themselves. I think in addition to that, we're seeing a lot of user platforms. So a single point where tenants, landlords, contractors can communicate with each other, easing the process, for example, of applying for licenses from their landlords, for entering short-term occupational documents with their landlords, rather than that needing individual lawyers and a long process. Both parties are in control of it. You've got a series of questions. They can sign up there and then on an app, on their phone, and have that instant communication and know what's going on. I think property providers are calling on AI as well for security around buildings, which in some cases has been very controversial. So I think some big property landlords have used facial recognition, and that's been a very controversial use of AI. But now we can see them adapting and adopting AI products for the same security reasons, but targeting behavior, and so a more user-friendly approach. And I think also we will see, particularly given how companies are using real estate differently and need less of a footprint or a permanent footprint, I think we'll see in the commercial sector a rise in platforms like Airbnb, where there is the ability to easily and quickly rent office space for shorter periods and on a less sort of permanent basis.
Thanks very much for that overview, Holly. We had a few kind of queries that just came in the chat bar there, but I think it was in relation to something Sabesh said. It was just, people wanted to know, was the software that you referenced, was it called Kira? I think it was Kira, wasn't it?
That's right. That's
great.
Software.
I think a few people might want to put that into a training contract application, so maybe that's why they just want to get the spelling of that. We now move on, and we're actually going to look at something that's actually caught my imagination a little bit, and it's these NFTs. And I think Jamie's going to tackle this question. It's from Ubaid Nasir, and he asks, how has the legal sector reacted to NFTs, and what are the key regulatory issues in governing them?
Thank you, Ubaid. That's going to be a fun question to tackle in a few minutes. No, I think I'll take that in two parts. Firstly, on the overview side, as with any technology, it's normally the case, or emerging technology, it's normally the case that law needs to catch up. The technology is ahead of the law. And to a large degree, that's probably true with NFTs. Certainly we're seeing, if you look in Europe at the moment, and the MiCA regulation, that's regularly dealing with NFTs, or more importantly, trying to work out whether it should or should not deal with NFTs. So at the moment, NFTs are ahead, but the if and when clients ask a lawyer about NFTs, they need to know how the law applies to NFTs now. So onto your regulatory risks, there's a number of different regulatory regimes which spring to mind when we're thinking about NFTs. And the first of those has to be financial services regulation. Because NFTs are a species of token, and clients will always be wary of, or ought to be wary of, whether a token of any type might fall within any financial services regulatory perimeter. So is it an investment product? Is it a specified investment against which regulated activities are being carried out? That's probably the biggest one that springs to mind, but there's loads of others. In the consumer space, if you're marketing NFTs, you need to make sure that you're not misleading consumers. You probably saw the ASA bans earlier this year. Data protection is an issue if you've got personal data around. And perhaps, there are others. IP is obviously a standout for NFTs, because if you're buying an NFT, what are you actually buying? I'm buying an image of a pink kitten, or I'm actually buying a token which has a link to a pink kitten in it. And does that mean I own the pink kitten? Can I share the pink kitten on social media without being sued? There's so many different regulatory regimes which can apply. That's a few of them. I could probably have a whole seminar on NFTs, but maybe we leave it there for now.
Thanks very much for that, Jamie. We actually had a question, and I don't know if there is an answer to this, but I'll try it anyway. And we've got a question down on the right-hand side, someone asking, do you think AI could play a key role in helping regulate NFTs in the future? Can you ever see those coming together?
Well, that's a fascinating question. I think really, well, the regulation of NFTs is, at a basic level, is something which is created by humans at the moment. All laws and regulations are created by Parliament or in a delegated fashion below Parliament. So the question you're really asking there is, could regulations be created by AI? And that is a question which is almost impossible to answer at the moment. I certainly don't think it's something we'll see in the short term. Perhaps if we talked more about the technical regulation of NFTs, could they be created by AI or managed by AI rules? That's a more fascinating and more, in my view, probabilistic possibility.
Thanks for that, Jamie. And just this is a question for the whole panel. I don't mind who answers it, but is this something that NFTs specifically, is this something that are on city law firms' radars? Is this stuff coming across your guys' desks? Or is it still a little bit, like I read articles and it's like, it'll be this picture of a monkey exchanged hands for like 100 million. Okay, I might be exaggerating there slightly, but that's the kind of headline. And I'm just thinking, this seems absolute madness. But sorry, if I turn to Alex on this, is this something that's kind of coming across HSF's desks?
Pink kittens and monkeys, probably less so, but we're certainly seeing it in a number of different capacities. So yes, I always like to think about this in the context of something called the Gartner hype cycle, which effectively monitor or tracks where different technologies, emerging technologies particularly, are in the terms of from the start point of innovation right up to the point of being overhyped. And then they go down a little bit of a hockey stick kind of thing into what they call the trough of disillusionment, when everyone realizes that actually the thing they thought was going to be amazing and circumvent these laws and regulations and open up this whole new world of things for them to do have been caught by law and regulation, like Jamie was saying, technologically aren't actually capable of doing what they thought they could do, and all these other various different issues that typically arise after an experimentation phase. And then it goes into what we call the plateau productivity, which is the mainstream, basically. Now, interesting, I was looking at that hype cycle earlier, which is why I mentioned it, and NFTs are right at the top of what they call the peak of inflated expectations. And I think that sums it up very, very well. What we've seen is a lot of noise, like we see with any other technology or type of technology or subgroup of technology, from a lot of people that are very excited about these things. And there's been some very big use cases, like you say in the news, where people have exchanged value very rapidly in large amounts of value indeed for these items. And people have got very excited about what the possibilities are. And what we're now seeing is that actually that's at a real peak, and that realistically now what we're seeing is all of that noise, all of that excitement cooling off, and a lot of incumbent organizations or larger businesses coming in and saying, okay, well, now that hype has been cut through, what is it we can really do with this? How can we really add value in this space? And so, yes, absolutely. As I say, we work for a lot of the crypto exchanges, so the exchanges that are actually hosting these things. That's one part of it. But what we're also seeing a lot of businesses in different sectors, particularly the consumer sector, like you'd imagine. But a lot of those businesses, and often, I can't say which, but often businesses you probably wouldn't expect as well, coming to us and saying, well, now we're thinking about how we can take these items or assets that we've got and that we can make them non-fungible, we can represent them in non-fungible tokens and sell those as unique assets to make a lot more money out of them from diehard fans or others that might be in that space. So we've seen things like, for example, just in the news generally, I think Nike has a pair of trainers that it's got a non-fungible token attached to at the moment. There's lots of other examples of that kind of stuff. Very unique use cases coming out, definitely landing across desks at the moment, Tom, and I think will only serve to increase as businesses start to cut through that hype and get more interested in the actual use cases that can really come from it.
Thanks for that overview, Alex. I think we're actually sticking with Alex for the next question, and this one's focusing on data and cyber security. And this is from Freya McEwen at Durham University, and she asks, how have issues surrounding big data and cybersecurity changed the legal sector in the last 5 years? And a follow-up question, will it continue to do so? Alex.
It is a very good question. I'm going to take that from the angle of changing the sector in as much as the way that we deal with our own cybersecurity and our own potential big data. And what I'd say in that is What we've seen over the last few years, I think this is true for every sector, but law is absolutely the same, is the realization that data serves an enormous purpose, enormous role in acting as a foundation for any technological advancement or digital transformation of businesses within that particular sector. The exciting thing for us, I think, as a sector is that, of course, we have a treasure trove of data. What we handle are these contracts that underpin business relationships between parties. They're full of information. They're full of data about what our clients do, about what others in the industries do, and so on and so forth. And so there's an enormous opportunity that sits around that very interesting, very confidential, very interesting information. The challenge is that with any valuable data set, it's like having a treasure chest in your house full of treasure. You're going to need some very good locks on your doors to keep it very safe if people find out about it. And of course, I think as awareness of big data and its importance has come about over the last few years, and increasingly so just generally across society, what we've seen, of course, are cybersecurity risks, data security issues that then come up. And there's many high-profile, I won't name the firms or the chambers, but there's many high-profile examples of firms and chambers being hacked into or attacked for that data set, that particularly sensitive data set that there is. I think what that's meant for us is that to balance that opportunity, we must be very, very aware of cyber and the importance of data security generally. I think we've always been very ahead as a sector in that space based on the nature of the information we get. And also because we have to inherit the obligations or requirements that are set upon our clients. And if we have financial services clients, they're heavily regulated in this space. They're heavily regulated to keep your data safe. So we're heavily regulated, probably to a slightly greater degree sometimes, to do exactly the same thing. So I think what it's done is just refocus the importance of balancing the data that we could have, data that we do have, with the need to secure it. And that will only become more and more relevant as we go on in the future, particularly as we look at law firms and businesses more generally, moving that data to the cloud, for example. And that cloud transition that was accelerated so much by the pandemic has only now added another potential attack vector for firms. It's only added another potential source of information externally to the firms that could be hacked into, and another thing that firms have to mitigate the risk around as well.
Thanks very much for that answer, Alex. We're now going to look at how this increased digitization is impacting not only the firm's clients, but its lawyers. And I think we'll take these slightly out of order. I would like to bring Holly in at this point. And the question is, can you describe some specific legal technology that you're familiar with and the impact it has had on your work?
Yeah, sure. So again, a real estate specific example, because that's where I sit. We use a product called Orbital Witness. And it's a piece of software which is linked into the land registry. If anyone doesn't have experience with that, the land registry is the UK's central land regulation centre. It's where all the deeds, it's sort of an official register of all the details of property. So all of the details we need are on there. The portal was set up 20 years ago. It's not very advanced and it's fairly clunky to use. So Orbital Witness is a product which links into that. So rather than going onto the land registry, we can go onto the Orbital Witness portal and pull off all of the information we need. We can search based on proprietor, which we can't do on the land registry portal. We can pull up multiple title numbers, which we can't do on the land registry portal. And what it's also allowing us to do is overlay, for example, Google satellite images on land registry mapping. So the land registry map is a very simple map. You can't really see what features are around, and usually it's out of date. By overlaying that on a satellite Google image, we can then bring that into context for our clients. So we can say, if there's a right of way here, and here is where it is in practice when you actually go to visit the property. In addition, it allows us to extract data from those official copies so that we can order it and sort it. For example, we'll often have to populate contracts with multiple properties. So rather than having to do that manually, we can extract that data and easily insert it. So again, it's one of those manual tasks that it's really sped up. And it also uses AI to produce reports based on the title registers that it's reviewed. And those reports take three forms. They're long form or a short form high level risks report. So it will identify the types of entries that are on those land registry documents and categorize the risk and the complexity of the title, which helps with work allocation and sort of seniority.
Thanks very much for that, Holly. And again, someone was just questioning what was the software that you mentioned there, but it was Orbital Witness. That was right, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Orbital Witness. So there you go, Christiana. That's what you're looking for there. Thanks very much for that, Holly. We're now going to come to a question for, I think it's Sabesh, and this is from Chen Yu of the University of Cambridge. And he asks, how has HSF's digital strength helped clients during the pandemic?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. That's a very interesting question. I think thinking to the height of the pandemic, I think one of the challenges that clients were facing was having to respond quickly to the economic shock and uncertainty brought about by COVID. And at HSF, I think what we've seen is how digital can really add value to our core strengths in corporate and disputes. So to bring that a bit into context, a particular example I'm thinking of is how we assisted the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, in bringing a test case about business interruption insurance. And the objective there was to get clarity for policyholders whether or not the insurance policy covered COVID-19 losses. So in terms of digital, what we did on top of that was to team up with the FCA to create an online tool. And what this tool did was able to help businesses and insurers check whether or not a particular business might be eligible to claim under insurance policy. So what it did was able to use location data and to see whether or not there were COVID-19 cases reported within the vicinity of a business. And that was a factor that played into whether or not companies could claim under a disease policy and the insurance. And I think an interesting thing and something I've seen here in the DLG is that this involved collaboration between practice groups and our own internal legal ops team. So techies and lawyers coming together to help clients, which is really, really cool.
Thanks very much for that, Sabesh. We'll now go to a question. Jamie, if we could turn to you a second. The question is, what are the primary concerns clients tend to have when introducing cutting-edge technologies to their legal needs?
Well, I think the obvious answer to that is what happens when something goes wrong. So to answer a bit more fully, clients obviously always are looking for us to reduce costs, increase the efficiency with which we can Work. So if I take the example of Kira that Sabesh talked about a little while ago, Kira can really speed up how quickly we can do DD for clients. Obviously, the problem is we've now gone from a human looking at a document and saying, this document has a particular issue in it, let's resolve it, to a machine is now telling us this document probably has an issue with it, and do we need to deal with it or not? Obviously, the easy solution to that is put a human in the middle and say, the AI system has flagged a risk, let's deal with it. But the risk still stays. The client needs to be comfortable with us using AI tools, and it's open to them to say, we want to save money on this matter, and the commercial risks are relatively limited, so let's go with whatever the machine says. More likely, we use the machines as much as we possibly can to speed up the process, making sure that wherever the machine could go wrong, a lawyer has covered it. Otherwise, there is this gap, which when you're providing a premium legal service, it isn't necessarily a result you want to give to a client. So yes, the big issue there is what happens if it goes wrong, and sometimes the answer to that is, can we insure against that risk? Just another avenue we might be able to go around. That's the big one I'll stick with for now.
Thanks for that, Jamie. And Just Alex, just a question that's just occurred to me, but is there a type of client that's more willing to adopt these kind of technologies in terms of the legal services? If I could just give the example, you've mentioned that you work, HSF works with a lot of crypto clients. I would assume from the outside looking in that they would be quite keen to adopt these AI types of technologies, whereas a more traditional client, perhaps like a more traditional bank, might be more resistant to that kind of change. Is that right, or am I off with that?
No, I think broadly it's right. I think it comes down to how tech forward the particular organization itself is. And so when we think about digital transformation, I think what is very easy to do is to say, there's a scale of digital transformation and the banks are at the front. Well, the technology companies are probably at the front, but the banks are somewhere just behind them. Maybe some of the manufacturing industry, because they've been using robots in the manufacturing process for a long time, for example, use artificial intelligence, maybe a bit of consumer. And then right at the back of the patch, maybe you find your, I don't know, oil and gas companies and things like that perhaps seem to be less innovative in that sense. But the reality is that actually within each of the individual sectors, there are trailblazers, those right at the front of the pack that are very tech forward thinking, and there are those that are lagging behind effectively in that space. And so actually, when you think about it, what I'm really finding at the moment is that it's not limited to a particular sector necessarily. What it's limited to is how tech forward is the particular client in the sector. So if you get a very tech forward oil and gas company, of which there are many out there, and many of our clients are indeed those, they might be more willing to test this technology or use this technology, or they might be having that pressure from the business, which is already digitizing itself, to say, we want that legal advice to be delivered up in a fashion that's more aligned with our ways of working, our expectations that sit around that. So I would say the big one for me is across any industry, and I can talk to real estate clients, banks, oil and gas companies, any type of different one that we've got that are using this kind of technology or want to use this technology. But it's those ones that are very tech forward in their approach to things generally, those that are perhaps a bit further down the line with their own digital transformations that are more willing to get engaged with that.
Thanks for that, Alex. And I think we're actually sticking with you for the next question, which is from Matt Bennett at the University of Exeter, which kind of actually flows into what you've just been discussing. But the question is, how do you advise clients when the digital innovations move so fast, yet the law traditionally moves much slower and can fall behind innovation and development?
That is an excellent question from Matt. So there's a few different things I think come together in this one. I think Jamie mentioned this earlier. The law and regulation traditionally do move slower, and that's in some senses because that is just the speed at which things have to move. You have to be very certain when you're legislating or you're regulating in respect of anything, frankly, and so it's necessary to watch and see some of this stuff evolving sometimes. And that's why we see typically, for example, regulators like the FCA setting up their sandboxes for digital technologies so that they can watch them more closely. They're not going to ban them outright. They're going to watch how they evolve and what they do, and they're going to engage with them in some major sense. So that's a really important aspect of this, is that actually it's a deliberate thing. Sometimes it's necessary, and I think it is necessary for law and regulation to move traditionally slower. What that means for advising clients actually is largely what I think we would generally expect anyway from clients. It's rarely the black and white that we're actually talking to clients about. Clients can typically get a good grasp of the black and white very quickly. What they're interested in are the grey areas that exist among and around regulation and law, and where they can potentially play. So I said earlier about that Gartner hype cycle and these innovation triggers and things moving up to that point of hype. And that's typically where people are saying, look at all these new things that we couldn't do before that we can do now. This technology circumvents all of these issues around law or regulation, or it circumvents technological issues that we've seen previously. And that's the exciting space, I think, for emerging technologies particularly, or digital innovation generally, where we're seeing clients come to us and saying, actually, can we do this and still remain within the law? Can we do this and actually comply with what is going to be placed on us, not just today, and this is really why they come to city law firms, but looking at the horizon as well. What's coming tomorrow? What do you know from speaking to the regulators? What do you know from speaking to others in industry? And so for us, it's really important. The advisory aspect isn't just about law. It's about the wider ecosystem. It's about the conversations that we're having day to day with technology companies, with universities or academia generally, with regulators or legislators more generally. And it's also about being able to pull in our views from different markets globally. because typically those clients we see coming to us aren't just operating in one location. They're thinking about, how can I operate? How can I launch my platform in these 7 countries? How can I do this thing or move into this particular country in the process? And it's being able to pull those pieces together as a large international law firm that is really where we add that significant amount of value. And as I say, the rest of it is really about working out within that grey, what can we do now? What's pressing on the wrong things, and what is going to come in the future? What do we think is likely, so that we can future-proof against that, which is, of course, a massive role in terms of law.
Thanks for that response, Alex. We now have a question here. I think we're coming to Jamie again on this one. Are there any particular innovations that you feel are unique to Herbert Smith Freehills? And this is in the context of law firms race against each other to innovate and integrate as many technology-induced efficiencies as possible.
Thanks for that one. I think I have to go down the route of smart legal contracts here. So we've, over the past few years, HSF has done a lot of work on smart legal contracts. Most notably, it collaborated with IBM, Data61 and CSIRO in Australia to create an organization called DLTCO, which is looking to effectively at the opportunity that smart legal contracts create. Just by way of background, smart legal contracts, if you imagine taking a paper contract and then using code to automate some of the provisions in that agreement. So you might have parties might execute this agreement and then payments might be automatic, or you might find when goods are delivered, that triggers something in the contract. So likely a payment, or it's this idea that machines are now so advanced that they can do a lot of the contract management that humans used to do, which can save businesses an awful amount of money. I think there was a statistic somewhere that around 9% of value from contracts is lost because humans mismanage them. So we've been doing a lot of work on that journey from getting from this paper contract to this far more potentially valuable digitized smart legal contract. So I think we, as a firm, we can definitely differentiate ourselves in the smart legal contract space.
Thanks very much for that example, Jamie. I think now seems like an appropriate time to dip into our poll this afternoon. Now, the panelists won't be able to see this, but I'll read the question out and we'll get your take on it. But for those of you tuned in at home or wherever you might be, on the right-hand side, you'll see the polls tab. Now, the question that we're asking this afternoon, which is completely anonymous, don't worry, we won't be calling you out on your responses, but the question is, who will lead the drive to make the legal profession wholeheartedly embrace technology over the next decade? And we've got a number of responses here. We've got law tech startups, we've got law firms clients, we've got global law firms, such as HSF, we've got small and medium-sized law firms, and we've got academics. So those are the 5 responses, and some of you have already been voting, which is great. I'll just give it a few seconds, because as soon as I pick the leader, it always changes. So we'll just give you a few more seconds to vote, but there seems to be quite no, it's actually getting a bit tighter, but just narrowly in the lead at the moment are law firms clients, which is quite interesting. So 42% of those of you tuned in at home think law firms clients will lead the drive to make the profession wholeheartedly embrace technology. Maybe, Alex, you nodded at that, like you're a little bit of agreement there. Would you agree with that to a certain extent?
Yeah, I think I would actually. I think there's a lot of different pieces that come together to drive digital innovation generally, or digital transformation across a market. And it's really interesting that we picked up on all those different segments of it, because of course you've got the opportunity of doing or emulating what tech companies have been able to do, which is fantastic. They've created a lot of value for themselves. That's brilliant. That's being emulated again by startups and scale-ups that are coming into the market to try and make things more efficient, to try and take revenue in that space. And law firms are seeing both the opportunity and the challenge and responding to that. But ultimately, we are a people profession. We are driven by our clients as a professional services institution in a wider professional services market. And I think at its very heart, all of this for me does come down to what is the client demand? What is it the clients need at the end of the day? In our sense, they need more for less effectively. They need us to be more efficient. They need us to be more cost effective. They need us to be delivering up in a more digital kind of format. And I think that is what's going to drive really some of the biggest innovations or the best innovations that we see personally. So I think most of your attendees have got that right personally.
Thanks very much. That'll be a relief to them. We're going to move on, and we've got another question. This is actually for the whole panel. And this is actually from Nathan Kazung from the University of Warwick, and he asks, what do you see as being the next biggest digital innovations? I don't mind who wants to start with that one. Or somebody at least.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
It's really hard to predict what the next individual technology is going to be. So I'm going to do the proper lawyer thing now and hedge my bets here. In saying there's a definite trend. We started out with what I'll call lower level technologies like cloud, which have helped clients do particular things. And now we're starting to see more advanced types of technology. So we're starting to see AI, machine learning. These are kind of, I'll call these slightly more intelligent technologies. So I think the trend is actually obviously upwards in intelligence, but also in the way that technologies interact with each other. So you're now starting to see this intelligence move across technologies. So I think the next digital innovation is actually just an evolution towards allowing machines to do more thinking for us, but hopefully not to the extent that Stephen Hawking predicts in his recent book, which is quite scary.
Thanks for that, Jamie. Holly, is there anything in the real estate sector that you think is going to be, in terms of digital innovations within there?
I think smart legal contracts will revolutionize the real estate industry. I think that contract management and data transfer will be key. So it's an existing technology, but once that's adopted on a wider scale, I think that will be transformative.
Great. As someone who's just gone through the conveyancing process, I couldn't agree more. Hopefully it's sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
We're going to end on a question, and this is again for the whole panel, and it's careers advice. So it'd be great to get a response from everybody because you're all coming at it with slightly different perspectives, which is great. And this is from Abolade, and she's at the University of Warwick, and they ask, how can aspiring lawyers best prepare for the future of a digitally transformed legal sector? And we're going to start with Alex, and we'll go around the room.
Thank you. I think that is a fantastic question to be ending on. I'm going to leave the coding aspects to Jamie, and I'm hoping that Jamie will tackle whether you need to code or not in a couple of seconds' time. For me, it's about, and I wrote about this on LinkedIn just yesterday, it's about people that have curiosity, people that have a desire to understand or to learn more, or to get under the hood of technological problems. That's really the important part for me. And so I think the biggest thing that anyone can do at any level, really, frankly, if you want to be a digital lawyer, is not lose that curiosity, build that curiosity, feed it with things, think about things broadly, think about things critically. Often in technology, there's no real right and wrong. There's certainly different views to be had on a lot of different things. And I think the best thing you can do is be reading around that subject, thinking about this in a very broad sense, thinking about it critically, practicing your critical skills around that, and coming to your firm or to your other business when you do become a lawyer as one of those hungry, driven individuals that wants to find out more. That to me is the biggest value that I can see in the team members, thankfully, that I'm sat with today, certainly.
Great to hear, Alex. Thanks. Sabesh?
Yeah, I think I have to echo Alex on that, and that having an interest in technology and being curious about what's happening in that sphere is really useful, and especially at a junior level, as a trainee, where you're moving around different seats, being able to have that knowledge and share it with your team, and maybe even have your mini teach-in sessions with other members of your group to share about an interesting piece of news or technology that you've learned about, and how it might impact the practice area is very valuable, and it will make you stand out.
Thanks for that, Sabesh. And Jamie?
Well, I suppose I shall cover off the coding element first. Obviously, I am a coder by previous profession, but I certainly wouldn't suggest that to be a successful digital lawyer, you need to be a coder. I think, as Alex said, it's really important, not as a coder, that you are interested in new technologies, and also you're interested in being flexible to adopt new technologies, because the industry is changing quite dramatically. It's not a quick change, it's not an overnight change, but it's definitely happening. The pandemic was a huge trigger to speed things up. But it's also worth remembering that ultimately what we do is provide legal advice. So you can't be a digital lawyer unless you are also a good lawyer first. So it's worth keep in mind that it's important to develop your legal skills. And then on top of that, have the curiosity and have the enthusiasm in technology. We all do. And I think that makes going through the transition to digital, and in fact leading the transition to more digital law, far more exciting.
Thanks for that, Jamie. And finally, Holly.
Yeah, I think I'd echo, and I think that having an open mindset, I think, is really important. I think it's not only important to technology, but also as a lawyer. I think one of the beauties of the job is that the law is always changing. Every day you'll be learning something, and it's applying that open mindset to technology, to the way you work, as well as to the law. I think critically evaluating how you are doing a task is useful, and then thinking outside of the box, and is there a form of technology that I think would be suitable for this? And I think having a very high level understanding of the output of a technology. So what can AI really do? What is it able to do, and what is it not able to do, so that when a technology product is put in front of you, or as Alex said, a very keen startup comes in front of you and promises you the world, you can critically evaluate that promise and think, from my reading around this technology, I think perhaps they're over-egging what they can do in the legal concept. Because I think it comes back to what Alex said, there are a lot of human traits that lawyers need to have that technology won't be able to take over. And so having a knowledge of where that split is, I think, is really helpful.
Thanks for that, Holly. And thanks to all the speakers. Unfortunately, in terms of the Q&A, I can't believe that hour is absolutely flown by. Some of the responses were excellent. It's absolutely fascinating area of the profession. But if you do, I know we had lots of questions in the right-hand side that we've just not had time to get to, but I know the speakers are hanging around for the networking. So first of all, thanks very much for taking part in the Q&A. I'm going to let you guys drop off and make your way to the networking before I give clear instructions for those of you tuned in at home. So you can do that by clicking the blue return button at the bottom, and that'll allow you to drop off the screen. But we'll see you over in the networking very shortly. Thanks very much, guys. So if you're tuned in now, what I'm going to ask you to do is we now move across to the networking. We've got an hour's worth of networking. You are able to see that by on the left-hand side. If you click the networking button, there you'll have two booths this afternoon. The two booths are, we have the Meet the Speakers booth. So if you've got questions for the speakers that we've just not had time to answer, go in there. That's the booth for you. We also have a graduate recruitment booth. So if you've got questions about VAC schemes, training contract, or just generally life at HSF, that's the booth for you. We've got members of the graduate recruitment team in there, and you can access both of those booths by clicking the button on the left-hand side marked Expo. Once you're in there, we really encourage you to share your audio and camera. So you can click the booth and then share your audio and camera, and that allows you to ask your question face-to-face to either the speakers or the member of HSF's graduate recruitment team. So just a quick reminder, the networking runs until 6 p.m, so you've got about 56 minutes. Get in there, ask your questions, and be brave and share your audio and camera. Thanks very much for tuning in. I'm heading over to the networking now. I'll see you over there.